Hey everybody, I am going to go through Cloze Notes for Great Depression and New Deal. So you can see it right here. We're going to start with Cloze Notes 1. I know that we have already gone over stock market crash, Black Tuesday. I'm just going to go back over those to make this all one thing. And this is going to take us all the way through Cloze Notes 5. And I'm going to tell you what you need to have under this page right here, the New Deal, underneath each one of these flippy flaps, okay? And we have already filled out the stock market crash, this page right here, and we've already filled this page out too about some events about the stock market crash, okay? So if you don't have those two pages filled out, you'll need to go back and fill those two out after I'm done. But right now, I'm going to start with Cloze Notes 1. So if you want to get your notebook out, get a pencil, and get ready, I'm going to tell you exactly what to write, and I'm going to talk to you about the Great Depression and the New Deal. All right, so the stock market crash. In the 1920s, millions of Americans bought stocks on speculation. Remember, people were doing really well during this the roaring 20s, remember that? And that meant that they had money to invest. And we've already talked about what that means to invest in a business. You can buy stock in a company, and that stock means that you're buying like a little piece of a big business. So you could own a little piece of Coca-Cola, for instance, okay? So the first word you write there is stocks. That meant that they had hoped for the price of shares in companies would go up, and that this sent the price of stocks up way more than they were worth, which is not a good thing. Now we're underneath Black Tuesday on Cloze Notes 1. When stocks began to drop their true worth, people panicked. People freaked out and they started selling their stocks for whatever they could get. And when that happened, the price of stocks dropped really fast. So everything was going really good, and then all of a sudden, boom, the stock market crashes. And that day in history is October 29th of 1929, and we call that day Black Tuesday, okay? Now I'm underneath, this is a picture of the day the stock market crashed in New York City. Now I'm underneath Great Depression. The depression that followed the stock market crash hurt, you'll write hurt, many Americans. People who were rich one day might have found themselves without a home the next day because the bank took their possessions, the money that they owed. Many banks went out of business. Unemployment rose really high, and thousands of people lost their jobs. Here is a picture of a crowded scene of people protesting with signs after a bank failed in 1931. So this is a few years after the stock market crash. People are still hurting. They hurt all the way through the 30s. This time period is known as the Great Depression. Okay, so I am still underneath Great Depression on Cloze Notes 1. The Great Depression was the longest period of unemployment and low economic activity in modern times. It began in 1929 and it lasted all the way through most of the 1930s. Banks and businesses failed, and only 1 out of every 4 Americans were unemployed. That's a lot of people. This picture, we looked at this picture in class. We talked about how this was a good depiction of a woman during the Great Depression. She looks worn out. She looks sad. She's got children hanging on to her. Her clothes are ragged. So this is a famous picture from the 1930s. Okay, now I'm underneath I'm under overproduction on Cloze Notes 1. Overproduction. In the 1920s, the economy was booming, remember? The roaring 20s. It was a good time. People were buying new things. Many companies built new factories and they were hiring people. After the stock market crashed, more goods were being produced than people could afford to buy. Many people were hesitant to spend money. And so factories started slowing down a lot and they laid off people. Many companies went out of business, okay? So that term overproduction right here, that just means that the factories were making too many things and not being able to sell it. And when you can't sell what you make, you're not making a profit. Too much debt. Now we're at the bottom of Cloze Notes 1. This is new to some of you. When the economy was doing well in the 1920s, there were many new products on the market, such as automobiles, refrigerators, radios, and washing machines. So you'll write new products there underneath too much debt, bottom of Cloze Notes 1. For the first time, people were able to buy bigger items on credit. This is called a credit is a loan. So when you put something on a credit card, you're basically taking out a loan. When the stock market crashed, people were no longer able to pay back their loans. And as a result, they lost their homes, their businesses, and their farms. So we just finished Cloze Notes 1. You need to turn the page and go to Cloze Notes 2. The bank system failed. So all of these are reasons why there was why we call this the Great Depression. Lots of different things happened, not just the stock market crashing, but it was a financial event after financial event. In the 1930s, if a bank closed, the accounts and money people had with the bank were lost. And after the stock market crashed, people feared that their banks would close and that they would lose all of their money. So people took out their money from the banks, and the bank, here I'm about to tell you what happens, the banks needed cash to operate properly. And if they didn't have the money because people were taking it out, they couldn't operate properly. So banks applied to the Federal Reserve Bank for cash loans, but their requests were not often granted because the United States didn't have the money to help them. So as a result, many banks began to fail. We're still under Cloze Notes 2. We're on bank systems failed. In the beginning years of the Great Depression, over 10,000 banks closed their doors. That's a lot of banks. This impacted civilians greatly, and people lost their life savings. People went from being rich to having nothing. And the United States government did very little to help those banks stay open. So we just finished Bank Systems Failed on Cloze Notes 2. Now we're under World Trade on Cloze Notes 2. While the Great Depression started in the United States, the whole world was struggling during this time. Remember, we had just come out of World War I. The United States had loaned money to the Allies during World War I, and those countries couldn't pay us back because they were struggling too. The SmootHawley Act in 1930, President Hoover signed what we call the SmootHawley Act. This act raised taxes on imported goods. Imported goods are goods that are coming in on a ship from other countries. The idea was to make these foreign goods more expensive than American goods. So people would what? Buy American goods instead of imported goods. Okay, so that was President Hoover's idea. He was like, okay, we'll get the American economy up and running if people are buying only American goods. But this meant that increased import tax for other countries buying American goods. So other countries weren't buying our goods because we were not buying theirs. Other countries were angry so much that they stopped buying American goods. So that's not good for America at all. This plan backfired. We are under World Trade on Cloze Notes 2. This led to the decreased international, you'll write international there on the very last blank of the page, international trade, and more American workers being laid off. Impoverished American family. These people are very poor. They don't have shoes. They are living in a shack. This is pitiful. We're not going to go over these questions. We're going to move right on. Now we are on Cloze Notes 3, so you need to turn your page to Cloze Notes 3, and we're going to talk about something called the Dust Bowl. During the Depression, farm income dropped 50%, and more than 750,000 farmers lost their jobs in their farms. On top of that, farmers in the Great Plains were hit with some severe drought. You know what drought is? Drought is when it doesn't rain, right? Without rain, crops could not grow, and they could not, plants, when crops grow, their roots go down into the dirt, okay? And it's holding the dirt together. Those crops could not hold the dirt on the ground. Much of the dirt's loose when it doesn't rain. So much of this blew away in these powerful dust storms. Here's a picture of what that might look like. I mean, this looks really, really bad, doesn't it? I'm going to show you some more of these pictures. Here's another picture of the Dust Bowl. These are just areas out in the Midwest. These are huge dust clouds because the wind was blowing. It's a combination of a few things. Too much wind, not enough rain, and poor farming techniques. Okay? And that's what caused the Dust Bowl. So, these pictures are pretty pitiful. This part of the nation became known as the Dust Bowl. It's just a funny term, but we call it the Dust Bowl because literally everything was covered in dust, okay? The skies would turn black, everything would be dry, and dust would be blowing up all over the place. Here's another picture of what this might look like. This is 1935 in northern Texas. Look at this, y'all. I mean, it looks like they're walking in the wind. There's no crops on the ground. Everything's covered in dirt. Midwestern states like Oklahoma and Kansas were especially hit hard. Many farm families packed all that they owned into cars, and they wanted to get the heck out of there, right? They went to California to start a new life, okay? And they hoped to find work out on farms out in areas like California to try to get away from this mess. Here's another picture of some barn equipment, some farm equipment buried in this dust in South Dakota in 1936. Okay, and so we just finished Dust Bowl on Cloze Notes 3. Now I'm under Herbert Hoover. Okay, you need to know that Herbert Hoover was the president when the Depression began. Okay, he believed that private charities and local communities should help the needy, and it wasn't the government's job to help. He didn't believe that the government should step in to help this Great Depression system. He believed that that the economy should take care of itself. Many people believe that he did not do enough to help Americans during the Great Depression. And here's a picture of him, Herbert Hoover, President Herbert Hoover, president when the Great Depression began. We talked a little bit about political cartoons. These would be printed in newspapers during the time period to make light of a political situation. So here's Herbert Hoover. It says, "It may not be perfect, but I'm sure it'll help quite a bit." And this is just a picture of him providing some farm relief, but it's not working because he didn't provide enough. All right, now I'm under Hoovervilles on Cloze Notes 3. Thousands of Americans could not pay their mortgages. A mortgage is a loan on your home. Okay, I have a mortgage on my house because I cannot pay cash for my house. So I pay a little bit at a time on my house. But these people don't have jobs during this time period, so they'd lose their homes. If I can't pay monthly for my home, Chad and I would be homeless. Many were forced to live in cardboard shacks, y'all, a cardboard box that they built in public parks. It might not be cardboard. It might be made out of little pieces of wood or whatever they could get their hands on, okay? These shacks were known as Hoovervilles. So where have we heard that name just a couple of slides back? Who was the president at the time? Herbert Hoover, right? So these shacks were known as Hoovervilles. So we'll find out why they're called that. Empty pockets. So people's empty pockets, because they don't have what? Money, okay? Empty pockets were known as Hoover flags. You know, when you turn your pockets inside out, it might look like a flag. And then newspapers during the time period, people were making fun of that and calling them Hoover blankets, because some people would have to cover up with a piece of newspaper because they were so poor. Here is what people would call during this time period a Hooverville. These are little shacks in a public area. People would live in these things. They're built out of scraps of metal, wood, cardboard, whatever people could get their hands on. This is a Hooverville. Here's another picture. Just a pitiful little picture. A little girl playing with some things. But this is what they lived in. So those Hoovervilles, let me go back to that picture. Those Hoovervilles were named, they were making fun of the president, y'all. They didn't name it after him to be nice. These were named after the president because people were mad at him. All right, now I'm under soup kitchens. Millions of Americans were out of work and they could not provide food for their families. So the homeless and hungry people roamed around the streets. Thousands of people would line up for food at what was called a soup kitchen that were run by charities. So soup kitchens might be at like churches. Here's a picture of some men eating, their bread and their bowl of soup. Soup's easy and cheap to make. And you can feed a lot of people with soup. So that's why soup was typically served at these for hungry people. After waiting in line for hours, they might receive some bread and a bowl of soup. This might usually have been the only meal that they would have gotten all day long. It's very sad. Here are some, I think we've looked at this picture before. Here's some men lined up outside of a soup kitchen in Chicago. It doesn't say soup up here though, does it? No, it says free coffee and donuts. Okay. Coffee's cheap, fairly cheap to make, and these men are lined up so that they can get a free meal. That just shows you how many men did not have a job. If they had a job, they would be doing that instead of standing in a line for free food for unemployed people. Look at this, y'all. Here's a tent giving away some free food. Look at all the people down the block. This is a snow. It's cold. Here, people lined up to get free food. And this is a rough time for our country. All right, and at the bottom of Cloze Notes 3, we're going to start talking about a man named Franklin D. Roosevelt. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected in 1932. Okay, so he's the president that was elected right after Herbert Hoover. He promised his campaign deal was all about the New Deal for the American people. So he had a plan to get them out of the Great Depression. This is what he looks like. This is the 32nd president of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt. We've already talked about another Roosevelt as president, Theodore Roosevelt. He was the president that pushed for the Panama Canal, and they were cousins. So Franklin D. Roosevelt, he's the president during the Great Depression that brought us out of the Great Depression. Franklin D. Roosevelt believed, remember, Hoover believed that the government should not interfere with the economy, but Roosevelt felt differently. He opposed that. FDR's government took an active role in trying to help the government recover. So the very last word on Cloze Notes 3 that you should write there is active. Active. Okay? Now we're going to turn to Cloze Notes 4. Cloze Notes 4. And we're going to talk about that New Deal plan for Herbert Hoover. I'm sorry, for that FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR. We typically refer to him as FDR. He had that New Deal plan. And as a fifth grader in the state of Georgia, you have to know 3 components of that New Deal plan. The New Deal was Roosevelt's plan to use the government programs to help the nation recover from the Depression. He began by pumping money into the economy, and he sent federal money to states to help the needy. Okay, he knew that there was a big need for people that were poor and they needed immediate relief. Along with his advisors, they came up with some programs that would help get the nation back on its feet. Okay, and the first program that we're going to talk about is the WPA. That's the next section down on Cloze Notes 4, WPA. Let me get through this. Okay, WPA. Roosevelt set up the Works Progress Administration. Okay, the Works, that's what WPA stands for. You have to know that. This program's purpose was to provide jobs to the unemployed. Okay, all of these programs are to get people back to work. That's their sole purpose. And we're going to talk about 3. And it's all about getting people back to work, making money for their families. The Works Progress Administration workers would build things like roads, railways. They would take care of government buildings. Okay, so here's some men working for the WPA. People who worked here would build bridges, airports, buildings, parks. Much of our interstate system across our country and highways were built during this time because of the WPA. The WPA also paid artists. So maybe you weren't a working man, maybe like a construction worker. Maybe you were an artist and you needed a job. Well, the WPA paid artists to paint murals on the sides of buildings, sculptures, statues, different things to honor people in our country that have done great things. Okay, so that was the WPA. Here's some artists working for the WPA. Look, they're working on roads. He's capturing the moment, I guess you could say, with a painting. The next program that you have to know, and the New Deal, is the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. The CCC gave jobs to men between the ages of 18 to 25. Okay, so you had to be a young man. These workers signed up for a project, okay, and this project required them to go out and live in camps. Okay, so they were kind of out in the wilderness. So you might be saying, well, why if I was an older man or a woman, why couldn't I go sign up for this? They just wanted young men to, unmarried at. A lot of men aren't married when they're that young, to go out and live in these camps for long periods of time. And when you're unmarried, you can do things like that, and you don't have a family that you need to go home to every evening and help take care of. So that's why they would choose young men. Okay, Civilian Conservation Corps. They would put young men to work preserving America's natural resources. So let's see what that looks like. All right, here's some men in the CCC eating some lunch. Here's their tents. They're out in the wilderness. They would build roads, plant forests, and they worked on irrigation and natural park projects like our national parks. Yellowstone National Park, the Grand Canyon. Out in Georgia, they would plant trees in the Chattahoochee National Forest, and they would work on the Appalachian Trail was built by the CCC. And by 1941, more than 2 million young men had worked for the CCC. So this was a big, that put a lot of people back to work. This is a great program. Here are some CCC workers helping to put up some telephone poles. And this is just a poster, an old poster that probably to recruit some of these workers during this time period. And the last program that you have to know as a 5th grader in Georgia, the New Deal remember, all of these are New Deal programs. This one is the TVA. The TVA stands for the Tennessee Valley Authority. And these guys would build dams and electrical power stations. So back in the 1920s, 1930s, much of the South, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, Mississippi, that area did not have electricity. They were still living, not the big city life, I guess. And so the TVA's job was to build dams through 7 states in that area around Tennessee to help control flooding, number one, and to generate some electricity. Okay, so these dams provided irrigation, which we've already talked about when we talked about weathering, erosion, and deposition. Irrigation is just to help when it rains. The rainwater needs to go somewhere, and we need it to go in the right places so it doesn't flood things. And then it needed to provide electricity to people living in areas that they needed to go to work in. And electricity was going to provide opportunities for people to work. Here is FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, signing the TVA Act, the Tennessee Valley Authority Act. This is a dam. This is the Fontana Dam, and it was constructed by the TVA. So on the other side of this dam, what is on the other side of this dam? A big lake, right? And then this is the river that, the dam is controlling how much water comes out of that. And the lake is providing recreation. It's providing a storage area for water for people. And then when it comes through that dam, it's spinning turbines so that electricity can be made. And we're going to talk about that in our next science unit is all about electricity. Here is the area that the TVA would be working in. See, here's Georgia. We live about right here. South Carolina, North Carolina, these are the Appalachian Mountains. So if you ever go up to Chattanooga, see Rock City, those places, that's this area right here. There's this is a big river, the Tennessee River, okay? And so this map is just telling you where some of the dams that the TVA built were. Okay, all these little lines right here are dams, and there's power plants all up and through here. And this is giving people for the first time electricity in their homes. Okay, and we're gonna skip on down. All right, so we have talked about the 3 New Deal plans that FDR had. And then the last section on Cloze Notes 4 is called Help. Roosevelt also set up many other programs such as the Social Securities Act and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. That would be the FDIC. And remember, some of you I showed, I don't have my purse on me, but all banks that are good banks are members of the FDIC, okay? And that just means that our money, I feel confident by putting my money in the bank that I can get my money back out and that the bank is doing what they're supposed to do with it, and I'm not going to lose my money in another crisis like the Great Depression. So the FDIC was put into place. Social Securities Act was put into place. That means when I get really old, money is being set aside for me, and I'm going to be able to take that money out when I'm older. cross my fingers, and I'm going to be able to get that money in little bits at a time to help me live when I cannot go to work. While the New Deal did not completely restore the country the way that it was before the Great Depression, it helped the nation get back up on its feet, okay? And then we're going to talk about the end of the Great Depression, okay? It wasn't until 1942, so y'all, that's a long time. That's over 10 years. The Great Depression started in 1929, and it didn't end until 1942. And the end of the Great Depression was because America entered World War II. And when we go into a war, our economy is stimulated, and a lot of things are being made, and money's coming in for the war. So I guess you can guess what our next topic will be about: World War II. Okay, so just know that the end of the Great Depression was because of World War II. We are moving on to Cloze Notes 5. Okay, this is our last Cloze Notes for this unit. We're almost done. Okay, and we need to talk about some cultural things that were going on in the 1930s. Okay, so it's not all doom and gloom. Americans find a way to find happy times through things, okay? So the Great Depression was a difficult time period for many Americans, and people are trying to find ways to forget their troubles. And they're looking for different actors, actresses, sports stars to do that for them. So to stop thinking about how bad and terrible the economy was, they would do things like, it was cheap to go see a movie. It was inexpensive to watch sports, listen to sports on the radio, read a book, listen to new music. And these were popular ways for people to forget life for a little while, okay? Just escape from it all. Here's a family gathered around a radio. Remember, there's not TVs during this time period. TVs have not been invented yet. So radio was what people would sit around and listen to. All right, a famous person during the Great Depression was a jazz musician named Duke Ellington. Okay, I am under Duke Ellington on Cloze Notes 5. He came up with a new kind of music called swing or big band. Okay, Americans could listen to this music for free on the radio. And this was a way for them to escape from their everyday troubles. Duke Ellington was one of the most famous and talented musicians during the swing era. And I think, yep, I'm going to play this for you. Fast forward to get to the good stuff. I think I've probably heard of this one before. All you gotta do is swing. So you see the band. So that's kind of fun to listen to. Here he is, Duke Ellington, and remember he was big band, so like a lot of guys and gals playing musical instruments and singing. He was a pianist, that means he played the piano, a composer, that means he wrote music, and a band leader, so that means he directed the band. His band traveled all over the United States and Europe. So here's the Duke Ellington band. They've all got some musical instruments, very popular. Another popular person during this time period, her name was Margaret Mitchell. She was an author of a very famous novel called Gone with the Wind, and you're familiar with that movie. Well, it was a book first. A lot of movies are. And Margaret Mitchell, she's from Atlanta, actually, so she's a Georgia girl, and she won the Pulitzer Prize for her novel, okay? And here she is. She's a very famous author, and she actually died. She got hit by a car. So she had a tragic ending, but her work was very famous. The novel was actually about a woman named Scarlett OHara, and her struggles in the South during the Civil War. So if you've ever watched that movie, you know what I'm talking about. But in the 1930s, people were inspired by this story because the theme of the story was overcoming a big tragedy. And the book was made into that popular movie in 1939. And here's the original cover to the book, Gone with the Wind. And it cost $3 a book. And it was very popular. Here's a picture of the motion picture movie. This is Scarlett OHara, and it won 10 Academy Awards. It still is very famous today. It's a very long movie, but it's good. All right, and then one more famous person from this time period is Jesse Owens. Jesse Owens was an African-American track and field star athlete. He broke 3 world records while he was in college. He was very famous. He inspired Americans. And in 1936, he competed in the Berlin Olympic Games. Okay, so the Olympic Games in 1936 were in Berlin, Germany. And we'll talk more about what's going on in 1936 in Germany. But just know that the Nazis had control of Germany during this time period. And this guy, Jesse Owens, and a lot of other American athletes went over to Germany during this time period and competed in Olympic Games. It was a very scary time. He won 4 gold medals. The war had not started yet, but it was on the verge. And so since Jesse Owens went over there and he won 4 gold medals, it angered Germany's chancellor, and his name was Adolf Hitler. You've heard of him, Adolf Hitler, because he believed that Owens was to be inferior because of his race. So something about Adolf Hitler is that he's a racist. He's a true racist. I know that term's thrown out pretty lightly these days, but this guy, he only liked certain kind of people because of their religion and their skin color. And Jesse Owens did not fit that description of what he liked. Okay, here's Jesse Owens in a action shot during the 1936 Olympic Games. And that ends our presentation. Now, I do want to go back to, you're going to have to fill out a couple of pages. So you're going to need to go back to this slide right here. This is slide number 49. Okay, and you're going to use slide number 49 through slide number 60 actually, slide number 60 to fill out. You're going to write 3 facts underneath each one of these flaps, okay, about the CCC. These are those 3 New Deal programs, CCC, the WPA, and the TVA. Make sure that you pay attention to which one is on top of that flap so that you don't write about the wrong thing underneath each one, okay? So that got us through all of our Cloze Notes for the Great Depression and the New Deal, and hopefully we will be back at school on Monday. And I miss you guys. I hope you're having a good time at home, and I hope that you're doing your work. Have a great day. Bye.